Welcome back to Maury's Music. My name's Maury Rutch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips.
We have a lot to talk about. How you doing today, Spoon?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's a lovely day, and this is a very special podcast.
Because
we have a special guest.
Oh, we really do.
He's in the building!
Oh, the one and only Robert Goetzl is joining us today, and we could not be more lucky and more appreciative. How are you doing today, Robert?
Well, hello, fellas. I'm just fine, sitting in my home in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, and it's beautiful here. I hope it's there as well.
And what is the exact address again?
He kids.
That doesn't matter now, does it?
I almost got you. I just want to make one quick statement before we go too far. Robert is officially the first guest on Martins and More. So first of all, thank you so much. And it's worth mentioning, do not look Mr. Phillips in the eye. Do not speak unless you're spoken to, standard stuff.
Shh. You're not supposed to say that on the air.
I'll try to follow all the rules.
In any event, we're really happy to have you here.
My pleasure.
And we probably should introduce you to our listeners by asking you to give us a little bit of a brief history of who are you, Robert Goetzl, and why are we talking to you today on the program?
Okay, well, I'll keep it brief, several hours. So, as I'm related to the Martin guitar family, I am Chris Martin's cousin from his mom's side, not from the Martin side. And before I landed at the company, I studied art and had a career as a freelance artist for maybe 20, 25 years before I came to Martin Guitar. And as a freelance artist, I've done a number of projects. I've had a number of children's books illustrated. I've worked with NASA, the United States Golf Association, Scholastic Books in New York City, a number of freelance projects. And in between those projects, I was asked by Chris Martin, as we were gathered, sadly, for a common cousin's viewing who had passed away at a pretty young age. And Chris Martin just threw out this invitation to me. Hey, Robert, if you ever have an idea for a guitar, send it along. And that was quite an offer. And that's one that I did not want to pass up. I can tell you an amusing story. Prior to that, many, many years ago, when things are tough as a freelance artist, like I had quit my job and my wife found out that she was pregnant with our second child. So there was like no going back. But when things were really bad, and I'm telling you, they were kind of bad, buying clothes at a secondhand store. And I had parents that would help me out monetarily when I needed to, but I really wanted to make it on my own. But I had asked Chris Martin if I could come up for an interview and maybe get a job. And I said to Chris, but I don't want you to influence anybody. And Chris's words to me were, don't worry, I won't. And I should have said, Chris, I hope you do influence somebody, because I did not get a job up there. But with that said, the experience of having to make it on my own as a freelance artist was very beneficial, because when I landed at the company, I felt that my portfolio and body of work could speak for itself, and people wouldn't just say, well, Chris wanted Robert's cousin to work up here because he can draw real nice, But so I had a pedigree before I landed. And I'm thankful that Chris did not hire me long before when I needed a job, because I was able to pursue this freelance career. And it was pretty marvelous up until Martin. But I must say, working for Martin has been a real highlight.
That's funny how things work out.
Fascinating.
Yes. Not always funny when they're working out, but yeah.
Well, I'd like to know, when you were coming up as an artist, did you formally study somewhere? Did you study art somewhere? Or was it something that you just developed on your own?
When I was young, of course, with a talent for art, and not a talent for much else. My father said, my mother must have realized, well, let him pursue this art, because I guess he can't do much else. And I applied to a small school in New Jersey, which was really famous at the time, called the Newark School of Fine and Industrial Art. And that school was housed on the fourth floor of a public school. It was one of the only public art schools in the country at the time for higher education. That was above a school called Arts High, where they would take gifted and talented kids from Newark, the Newark school system, who could sing and dance, play instruments, all of that stuff. And they would house all of these students in a situation where they could thrive in the arts and do schooling. So my art school was above a very talented high school. And we would have teachers coming in from New York City schools like Pratt and Parsons one day a week and instruct us. And teachers came from all over. I mean, one guy had a ceramic shop in New Hope. A lot of people had artistic careers and galleries representing them, and they would come in and instruct us in painting and drawing. But there was no academics as far as science and math and English. And that's all the stuff that I didn't want to do. So I was really happy where I landed.
That's so cool. I'm afraid we're almost going to get too much information too soon. I'm not sure if you've listened to the podcast before, but it's not uncommon for us to spring a good trivia question on our listeners. Would you mind if we ask you to do that this week?
Who, me? Sure. So, trivia question, I guess for your listeners who are Martin aficionados, can you name my first project with the Martin Guitar Company? And it was pretty significant. So it would be my first project that I did that the public would have seen with the Martin Guitar Company.
We bring that up. I'd like to mention that Martin was able to acquire the ability to reproduce artwork on top of a guitar's top, and originally they could only do that on those high-pressure laminate tops. But now with the digital printer, they can do it on very fine, tone wood tops. And I was very impressed that the otherwise conservative Martin Guitar Company, and Chris definitely takes after his grandfather in that respect, took advantage of this to do some absolutely amazing artwork guitars that Robert F Goetzl is the primary provider of. So we started with what you mentioned, what the first one was. Let's jump up to the modern times. What are some of your recent projects that you've done for them that you're allowed to talk about? I know there's some things that might still be in the works, but that have actually been released.
That's right, because I've got classified documents that I'm not allowed to talk about. Anyway, yeah, that's a good question. And to your point, Spoon, when you're talking about this high-tech printer, I was lucky enough to be at lunch when they were discussing getting one of those. And I was thinking to myself, oh boy, they're getting me a toy. Because, that was really inspiring me with a lot of thoughts about how much I can do now and have it reproduced. But currently, I'm doing an awful lot of hand-painted models. And in fact, Chris Martin generously, if you want to say that I've been given my own line of guitars, has given me this gift where there is a base model that has been designed with inlays and binding, beautiful abalone inlaid Martin logo at the headstock. And this is my line of guitars, which are known as the D-ROBERTGOETZLs, and then they're numbered. I'm currently working on 6, I think. But they're hand-painted tops. So I'm physically taking a guitar that's been assembled, and the body is given to me. They keep the neck, and I work on the guitar directly on top of the tone wood spruce. And I'm painting with paints.
Wow.
And then I bring it back to them.
That's spectacular.
And they do the finished work on it.
Now, so we'd like to point out to the listeners, I'm going to call them readers, the listeners, that if you go to Martin Guitar now, you will find the D. Robert Goetzl models displayed, some of the ones that he's working on. And like, for instance, what was the first one of the new, which one did you do first of the new hand-painted tops?
Technically, Spoon, the first one was a hops and barley model. That was a guitar that was sitting in R&D, and for some reason, I'm not so sure what the decision was, but they felt that they were going to just rough up the top with some sandpaper for me, and I could paint directly on there with a hops and barley theme. So I painted some hops and I painted some barley. And
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
the kind folks at Huber Breeze bought it. And I don't know if they've sold it, but it's either in their collection or somebody's purchased it from them at this point. So that was technically Robert Goetzl 1. But the real, in my mind, the real first ones were I did 2 Tiger guitars. And these are designs that I had developed on watercolor paper. And, I do an awful lot of studies or ideas or concepts, and I bring them up and think and say to people, to my colleagues that I work with, what do you think? Could this be a guitar? And occasionally they go, yeah, that'll work. So I did 2 hand-painted Tiger guitars, which then coincided with the Chinese Lunar New Year, the Year of the Tiger, which is this year. And so I believe Tom Lee Music purchased 2 of those.
For those who have not had a chance to see this, we're not talking about like Jerry Garcia's Tiger guitar with a little tiger inlaid on the headstock. The entire spruce top, one's a white tiger and one's a traditional orange tiger. And it's a full face with these beautiful eyes and snout, and that fills up the whole lower bout. And then having tiger stripe, it's sort of stylized. You don't see an actual neck, but you sort of see then the tiger stripes moving up and the fur. And really, one of the things that I've always been so impressed with your work is how your depth and your three-dimensional perspective is sometimes just startling. And those tiger guitars are just spectacular.
Well, so thank you so much. It's a challenge painting directly on a guitar. A lot of people don't like imagery, so I get those that love it and those I wish I never did it. But, the challenge for me, and this is a really sincere challenge and one that I take really seriously, is that, when you're painting on a canvas, such as, canvas material or paper or whatever, and you can apply paint very thickly if you want. It's like something when you're painting with emotion, you're putting down the paint and that expresses that emotion just like you would with a guitar or a violin or any musical instrument as well. But on the top of the guitar, I can't do that. So this paint has to be applied very, very thinly. I sand it down while I'm working on it to make sure that it continues to be this smooth finish. Because if you put too much paint on it and then they cover it with lacquer and you have a very rough surface of paint and they need to cover it with more lacquer and more lacquer to make this top just very flat and shiny, the guitar is going to have 6 pounds of lacquer on it and it's going to sound horrible. So it still has to sound like a quality Martin guitar because the price point is not cheap either.
Oh, that's a good point. They're letting you paint on a guitar, but they're also saying, don't ruin it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Unlike a piece of paper, Maury, if I make a mistake or I'm blundering or things aren't turning out exactly as I would like, I just can't crinkle it up and throw it in the garbage. So, I can't go back to them and say, I really screwed this up. I need a new top. That's not going to happen.
You talked about the hops and barley design. Mm-hmm. Did that predate the hops and barley guitar that just did come out at NAMM?
Yes, maybe by a year and a half.
I'll ask the obvious question. Was the hops and barley that we saw Tim Teal showing us at the factory a few months ago, was that inspired directly by your idea?
No, as a matter of fact, I believe they had that guitar in the works. And they I was given a sinker model to paint on, which became the hops and barley guitar. So I think they had this Craftsman style hops and barley guitar already done as a prototype, very loosely. I could see it had hops and barley.
Yeah, this was something that Tim Teal had seen a piece of. He said it wasn't exactly folk art, but he saw some artwork somebody had done when he was on vacation of barley, and he thought it was attractive, reminded him of the old arts and crafts movement. And then somebody at some point suggested, well, if you add hops to it, then you're going to, then the whole craft beer industry thing's going to come in. But it's quite a different design. The Robert's design is much more colorful, and has these is it two or three or four, I don't know, enormous hops on the lower bout, and much more ornate. The top is all designed, whereas with this limited edition hops and barley, it's all inlaid on the headstock and the rosette and the pickguard, and it's not a painting on top of the top. So same idea, same motif, if you will, but very, very different guitars.
Nice.
Yes, exactly. Tim wanted that the guitar that I worked on, the Hops and Barley, to kind of mirror the theme that they were already designing. And I think, for whatever reason, maybe that sinker guitar that he had pulled off the wall and said, "Here, we'd like you to paint on it." There might have been something that Tim wasn't satisfied with, not sound quality so much, but perhaps visually on the surface of the top, which would have then been covered up with paint.
Could it have been a torrefied top? Was it a VTS top? And because that sometimes leaves, anomalies in the darkens the top in various places. So I just wondered if that might be what was behind it.
That could have been. He didn't really tell me why. They just gave me a guitar and I said, thank you, and walked out the door with it.
That's what I would do too.
Another thing I'd like to point out about these Robert F Goetzl line of guitars is these are thoroughly professional level guitars on par with the standard series. Some of the other models that Robert's artwork has appeared on that's done with the digital printer is in some of the more affordable price range, guitars. But these are full-blown hand-fitted dovetail neck joint, forward-shifted scallop bracing, solid East Indian rosewood back and sides, and they have, at least some of the models, the ones I've seen, they have the multicolored rope purfling that is very similar to the Style 30 purfling and Style 34 purfling from the early 1900s. So really well thought out and really attractive. The American Eagle one that you did, that's basically got the American flag and then that enormous bald eagle, swooping down with his talons, is another, stunning instrument. Was that part of that series, or was that one that was done with the digital printer?
Oh, no, that's another hand-painted model.
Yeah, I thought it might be because it looks so great. It looks really, really great.
To your point, Spoon, because Tim Teal gave a lot of thought to how this base model guitar was going to look long before that, as Chris Martin said, we want you to do these hand-painted series, but Tim kind of came up with the choices of embellishments and how much bling he wanted to put on there and how much inlay and the rope purfling that you mentioned. He did a stunning job designing this base model, and as far as I know, no other Martin guitar has this collection and assemblage of inlays and purfling and binding. So it's unique guitar to begin with, even before I start painting on it.
And the White Tiger, at least, I don't remember about the Orange Tiger, where the American Eagle has jet black ebony fretboard and bridge. The White Tiger one has highly figured. I'm assuming it's ebony, but it's it's full of all different browns and blacks and again very arresting visually. So really cool idea.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because with the White Tiger guitar, at least, it's important for Chris Martin to have a conversation with the Martin people, not in the factory so much as the Martin family that wants to buy their guitars from the Martin Guitar Company, to realize that there is a limited supply of tone woods, of black ebony, and they occasionally get shipments of what was being called striped ebony. And Chris thought that this would be a good model, the White Tiger guitar would be a good model to showcase some of the other options that they have for ebony, that people maybe need to not get used to seeing black ebony because it's disappearing, right? There's a limited supply. And so this was Chris Martin selected this striped ebony for the bridge and for the fingerboard to be put on the Tiger guitar. So it was real collaboration, but he did want to showcase the fact that, it doesn't have to be black ebony for it to be beautiful.
Absolutely.
And so that was part of that guitar story. And I'm really happy that you brought that up, because it's not something that they talk about too much because, these old timers, the ones that think Martin guitar ought to have this, this, and this, things are changing in the planet as far as availability, and we're not always going to have this resource available for guitars. I mean, there might be something that you can manufacture that's going to be black and look like ebony and won't be ebony. But for now, there's only a limited amount of all of these tone woods and all of these woods that are sourced.
Robert Goetzl just talked about the planet. Are you going to say it or should I?
You should say it.
All right. We have to take this segue. We don't get many segues on this show. And when they show up like this, you have to run with them. Please tell us about the OOL Earth.
That is a project that I am personally really proud of, because I was just struck a few years ago, by this young woman, Greta Thunberg, who was taking this assemblage of students and going out on climate strike. And I thought to myself, what a beautiful thing, first of all, that, young people are recognizing that, the planet maybe is, there are changes going on as far as climate, whether you believe it or not. But maybe it's time that we rethink how we're doing things on the planet for survival. And I was just so impressed with these kids that I thought, as a statement piece, like in the 60s when there were war protest songs or people were writing folk songs and ballads and things like that, maybe they need a guitar. So I just put together this concept of this Earth, planet Earth, what I thought was a very simple design of the Earth on this guitar, and I quickly did this watercolor sketch and sent it off to the company and my colleagues. And it bounced around for quite a while, but eventually Chris Martin said, let's do this. And when Chris Martin says, let's do it, all of a sudden everybody's ears perk right up and they go, okay, we should do it. So it gets done. But what a collaborative effort this was up at the factory, where other people said, Robert, this is a nice artwork, but we're not going to put it on an HPL top. We're going to make a guitar built out of sustainable woods. And we're going to do this very environmentally friendly. And we're not going to put plastic on it. And we're going to put it in a hemp gig bag. And it became quite a project. And the reception has been, to me, very overwhelming. That people are catching on, that it's not just a beautiful guitar, but it's a statement piece as well. If you're playing this in public, what you're saying is, I'm on the side of the Earth. I'm going to care for the Earth the best I can. Maybe I'll do some more walking instead of driving, riding a bike or whatever. But, it's a statement that you're aware of some of these environmental changes that are going on, and maybe we could make them happen a little bit less dramatically if we do certain things. So.
Oh, yeah. And Lori and I really appreciated spending time with you at the NAMM show, getting a really good look at it. And I know this might sound like a dealer talking about a product, and I don't mean to sound that way, but when you see these guitars in person, even if you do like the way they look in a picture or in a video, there's something about the way that the OOL Earth looks when you're holding it, and just, it's, talking about it on a podcast won't do any better than a picture will, but I want to take this opportunity to tell you how much it really impresses me when you're actually playing this thing in your lap, just looking at this instrument, not to mention it's a beautiful sounding 17 in every other respect. These guitars really are amazing to me.
I appreciate it. Those are really kind words. Thanks, Maury. Where I'm fixated on the imagery, I'm counting on other people within the company to say, this sounds really good too. These are not, I don't want people to get the impression that these are just sort of cheap guitars with images on them that, will make nice wall art. They're supposed to be, the quality is unmistakable, and they're supposed to be played, not just hung up as pieces of art, but they also create a visual message along with the musical message that somebody might want to send or write, so it's a combination of factors, the visual and the audio, which I love.
I'm going to recommend that the listeners look up some of these guitars while they're listening to this podcast. That guitar with the extra long 00 body that's got the sloped shoulders, even though it's a 14 fret guitar, which gives him a nice broader canvas, if you will. is just a stunning guitar. You know, I say this a lot about a lot of his artwork, but this, if you're not familiar with it, is the planet Earth with the clouds and the land and the ocean and this artistic, you know, stylized sun, like the star, our star coming up behind it. It's beyond description. So I really urge people to search for it online to see what we're talking about, because it's, I think a lot of people think it's one of the most glorious ones that you've come up with.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know what to say. You know, when I talked about the inspiration behind Greta, but I'm also going to go back to when maybe I was 10 or 9. And there was a time when Apollo astronauts were first trying to get to the moon. And tomorrow, I think we're sending a rocket up that's going to start another journey in the future about, you know, going back to the moon. But, you know, when I'm 9 years old, there's 3 guys in a spacecraft on Christmas Eve. And I believe they take a picture, which winds up in National Geographic, that I was reading at the time in 1968 or 69, where there's this there's this Earth rise over the surface of the moon. And, you know, as a 10-year-old kid, it didn't take much for me to realize that this beautiful blue marble hanging in blackness, you know, this is it, right? We're out there. We're not going anywhere else, and the moon does not look like we can, you know, live on it. We can possibly in the future, but not by walking around in the sunshine with the bathing suits and going in the ocean kind of thing. So as a kid, I was inspired as well to realize that, you know, we get one planet, and we need to figure out how to live on it peacefully as people, but also environmentally friendly. Now I sound like a genius at 10, but I wasn't.
Yeah, well, and I think it may have been Carl Sagan, but somebody along his lines said that single photograph may have had more to do with broadening and spurring on the ecology movement than any other single photograph. And
Yes.
I remember it as well.
Yep, I completely agree.
Robert, you mentioned, you know, these are not cheap guitars. I think a lot of people forget that the least expensive guitars that Martin makes are still really good musical instruments. And I think Chris once said that 50% of the world's guitar market for flat top acoustic guitars is less, you know, they cost $500 or less. And so
Yes.
Martin for many years didn't even get close to that price range. But so with some of the ones that are made in Mexico, that with the high pressure laminate back and sides and sometimes high pressure laminate tops, they still sound better than an awful lot of guitars you're going to find in guitar stores. And one of my favorite designs of yours was the one that was done to commemorate the anniversary of the factory in Navajoa, Mexico.
Oh,
Which has that artwork that's, you know, inspired by the national symbols of Mexico or Mexico.
yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, I sure could. Thank you. You know, I forget sometimes all of the guitars I've done. And it's kind of you to remind me of that. Yeah,
me too.
it just came about because they were celebrating 30 years of their facility in Mexico. And I was particularly impressed with the dedication of these Martin people in Mexico. You know, it's a Martin factory. It's not that, for those of your listeners who don't know, they're not outsourcing these guitars built off-site by a company somewhere. It's a Martin factory in Mexico, run by Martin employees who have the same dedication as the ones in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. And everything is built according to spec, just like it is in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. And so the suggestion was, again, it's always a collaborative effort for the most part. Somebody I was speaking to suggested, well, you know, you should look at the Mexican flag. They have some really nice imagery. Maybe you can incorporate that as part of this Navajoa anniversary model. And so I did. I took an awful lot of the theme, changed it around to be a more pictorial story on the top. But I did use elements like the golden eagle and the snake and the cactus, things that you would see on the flag. But I was not allowed to use all of the symbolism because I guess the Mexican government had some reservations about taking all of the elements. But anyway, I mean, the legal team at Martin Guitar submitted all these sketches and painting that I did, and we waited for approval by whatever interior government source it was in Mexico. And we listened to their suggestions and came up with this piece of artwork. But yes, that was a watercolor that was painted and then reproduced on an HPL top and manufactured in Mexico.
That was another question I was going to ask you. Before you got into doing the hand-painted tops, when you were doing the work for Martin's various projects, do you have a singular medium you work in, a favorite medium, or do you work in different mediums when you are coming up with these paintings?
Oh, those are really good questions, Spoon. I got to tell you. So I love all mediums. I love working with oil paints, with watercolor, acrylic. I work with, but it wouldn't be my go-to favorite. But for the most part, I work with a watercolor and a mixed media sort of approach, with paintings that are done that will be reproduced with that Mamaki inkjet printer that they use. Because I'll work on watercolor paper. It has to be scanned or photographed at that point and then altered through Photoshop to make sure it fits the dimensions of the body and the top perfectly. The difficult thing with some of these artworks is planning around a sound hole and a bridge, because those are the two prime real estate spots right in my canvas, and I have to work everything around a big hole in the middle and this other thing that sits there that the string's attached to. And you know, sometimes you would like that image, or a clear bridge would be really nice, by the way, but that's not going to happen. So you have to work all the imagery around these, parts of the guitar that are essential for making it to sound really good. So that is a challenge sometimes, coming up with composition.
Fascinating. And I noticed a lot of your guitars tops just have a hole, because it's basically a picture with a hole in it. But the new hand-painted ones get, like you said, that abalone rosette. So you had to work with that too. In addition to having the hole, there's also the ringed rosettes that goes around it as well. So.
And Spoon, thank you for bringing that up, because I've gotten really good at taking some very thin masking tape and taping around all of these parts that are not going to have paint applied to them. So I do, on that rosette, I do take the tape and I tape off the pearl that's in there and the black and white rosette, and then I go around the binding area and cover that up. When they give me a body, they don't have the bridge attached, obviously. And they do something really special for me. They prep it, the spruce top white. They give it a thin coat of white ink that I then sand slightly just to make some tooth. But I want a white surface to paint on, because it's very difficult to paint, to me, on raw spruce. The paint, because I start out with a white base, I don't need to apply the paint so thick to cover up, say, the natural wood color of a guitar if I'm doing a certain color. So the white gives me a nice base to start working on, but I have to plan around the bridge even though it's not currently on the body. And then of course when they get the body back and there's this beautiful hand-painted top, at least I like to think it's beautiful, then they have to pocket route where the bridge goes, and that gets a little dicey because you don't want them to chip off the artwork and you don't want paint flying off where it shouldn't. And interestingly enough, on the first two Tiger guitars, the orange guitars, there were three Tigers altogether, Spoon. There were two Bengal-style Tigers, which are the orange ones, and then there was a white one. Well, the first two Bengal Tiger guitars were hand-painted and brought to the factory, and somewhere along the line, either the top wasn't prepped right or my paint wasn't the right mixture with acrylic medium in it or something. The paint and the lacquer were not compatible, and they were getting checking on the surface. And they kept sanding it back and trying to put more lacquer to fill it in, and it wasn't working. They had to sand off the entire top, illustration and all of my paint, and give me a new white top, and I had to do it all over again. But I think the second one's turned out even better. So
Well, this conversation is going very well, and I'm going to go ahead and stick my neck out. Let me ask you, Robert, are you having a mediocre time yet?
Yeah, I'm having a great time.
Oh,
We can run for 3 hours today, right?
Well, you're going to cut into Spoon's lunchtime if you do that, but I have a question for you that I probably should have started with. I don't want to go too far before I ask the question everybody's got on their mind. Do you play guitar?
Everybody has that question. Well,
I say so.
it's sort of a sickness. I think I have 5 or 6 Martin guitars. I do strum,
Nice.
and I enjoy my personal stage performances at home in the kitchen
excellent.
that nobody else hears. It's really relaxing. I enjoy every minute of it, but I don't play. And one quick story that I'd like to share is that when I was, at that age, 10, 9, I did want to learn guitar. And my parents, maybe typical of parents of that era, the Depression era, thought, well, what if he doesn't like it? Should we buy an expensive guitar that's going to sit in a closet? Or we'll get one of those cheap Sears Silvertone models and we'll let him play that. And if he's really good, we'll go get him another guitar. Well, first of all, my music teacher, I have to say, that was a disaster. I had 4 lessons. He yelled at me the whole time about looking down at the notes, at the strings. I mean, I'd like to introduce him to Eric Clapton today and say, hey, this guy does it too. But he discouraged me from wanting to play. And of course, true to my parents' fear, the guitar wound up in a closet and I never played it, aside from 4 lessons, because let's face it, doing scales for a half an hour at the time. I mean, I just wanted to learn a few tunes, right? So I'm working on my scales. My fingers hurt because the action is killing my fingers. It sounds like crap, and I just couldn't stick with it.
Yeah, that's very discouraging.
So you can take some inspiration from this story because a friend of mine who was the same age, she said to her father, Robert's got a guitar. Dad, I'd like to get a guitar too. And he bought her one. I think he bought her a good one. And she wound up using that instrument and going into the music field and playing, and still plays today. And I think was elected singer-songwriter of New Jersey maybe a half dozen years ago or 9 or 10 years ago. And she kept it up.
No
So
way.
my disaster turned out to be something positive for somebody else, which was great.
Do you want to mention her name? Give her a plug?
I sure will. So a lifelong friend, I still talk to her, Loretta Hagen.
No way.
She was in Nashville for a very long time. Huh? Do you know her?
I sure do. Jim Monahan, friends of ours, when I'll say Jim Monahan and Spoon knows who I mean. I saw Loretta Hagen several times in Jersey, sure.
Yeah, Jim's
Really?
a big DJ in New Jersey.
Wow.
Well, we
Yeah.
grew up 2 doors apart on the same street. A lovely gal. I love her. She's a great kid. I still think of her as a kid. We're all in our 60s. But she's terrific. I mean, a lovely person and a great musician. And, she's still doing it. She's still making it part of her life, which you got to admire. So that was a long answer to your question, whether I play or
Yeah,
not.
no, that's very cool, though.
Well, that's the kind of answer we wanted. And I want to say it's a small world, but it's a small OOL Earth.
Yes. That's a great plug.
Yes, indeed.
One of the things working with the company, and one of the benefits to maybe having family own the company like Chris does, and not having a board of directors and not having, it's not a publicly owned company, is that Chris can sometimes let his mind wander and say, this would be a good idea for a guitar. And he doesn't have to send it for approval, right? He doesn't have to bring it to the board. Nobody has to approve it. We can just do it. And he is, again, so generous with me. There was one project that I really wanted to do just to highlight the plight of Native American people, indigenous people, and which still exists. And I put together this illustration of this Native American tribal leader. And I wanted to have a custom guitar made just for me, but I also wanted to show Chris Martin, this is how it could look. If you would like to do this guitar, and maybe we could donate money to the charity. That was Chris's suggestion. And so I did this, it was, I think, R.D. RG-18, a D-18. And it turned out beautiful. And I was another project that I was really proud of because I could highlight a cause that was near and dear to me. Native American people in the United States, often mistreated, through the ages. But because of Chris Martin, you can bring ideas like this to him. And if he sees a merit in it or something, he will give it his wholehearted approval and back it, which is just great. I mean, they don't always get his approval, but when they do, it's a really special thing, at least for me.
Oh, I remember that model. That was gorgeous.
Thank you.
And you had already done the, what's the name of it? I can't think of it there. It was a children's book that you illustrated about Native Americans that
Oh, yes.
I remember. What was it called? I can't think of it right now. But
I could help you.
yeah, I know. Okay, yeah, if you want to go ahead and mention it, go ahead. But I just thought I might be able to pull it out of my aging memory, but I can't.
Well, thank you. I did two. One was Many Nations.
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about. Yeah, that's the one I was
And
remembering.
the follow-up book was called Seasons of the Circle. In my freelance career, it's amazing how many doors would close, but another window of opportunity would open. And I've been so lucky in that career when things seem to be coming to an end that another opportunity would come up. And by luck, by chance, in a day and age where I could bring a portfolio of artwork to real people and, call up a company and say, I'm a local artist. I'd just like to meet with the art director, bring my portfolio, see if you can evaluate it. Maybe there's work that we can do. That was the kind of day and age that I grew up in. And I was lucky enough to have somebody who happened to love my work and right off the bat offer me a Native American children's book based on some of the things that they saw in the portfolio. And luckily that book wound up winning an award, Teacher's Choice Award, in 1997,
Wow.
Which then gave me another opportunity to do the second book, Seasons of the Circle. But what I like to mention an awful lot, that I realized that this journey that I'm on as a freelance artist couldn't happen without people along the way who said, yes, I believe in you. Yes, we love your work. Yes, here's a project. And that starts obviously with your parents who say, oh, Robert, oh, it's just so beautiful, But then other people start saying, we like your work, and here's a job, and here's more work. And you're never in it alone. If I could, I would introduce all the people that have helped me along the way. I'm sure there were thousands who have supported me in some way or another, whether they got me my first art supplies and my first easel as a young kid, or invited me to work on something and just kept encouraging me along the way. This journey has been amazing because of the people that I've met and worked with and continue to have relationships with. It's just been just a godsend.
Yeah, it's very nice. You mentioned early on that, some people wish you didn't do this at all, like they have to impose the way they think things should be on everybody. And one of the ones that has gotten a lot of comments is the recent aircraft nose art, and that is inspired by the nose art on a Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, that if people know the Flying Tigers that were in the mercenaries in the Chinese Air Force that eventually became part of the American Air Corps and Army Air Force, that particular guitar, when you see it in real life, the three-dimensional aspect of it is just astounding. Like from across the room in the picking parlor at their factory or wherever it is, it looks like, first of all, it looks like Army Air Corps green from like 1941, and it looks like sheets of aluminum and rivets. Like real, like you could walk over and rub your hand over it, and I expected it to like be rough where the rivets were. And how did you accomplish that?
Sorry, folks, we had a little bit of a connection issue, and some of Robert's audio is a little bit less than optimal. But stick around, it's only temporary, it does get better, and you won't want to miss the end of the show.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that was done actually a number of years ago. Again, another collaborative effort. A lot of these projects do start with conversations with Tim Teal, whom I know you know very well. And Tim had suggested that we do this sort of Flying Tiger theme on a guitar. And, that's sometimes the only instruction I get. Well, Spoon, you asked a really good question because what wound up taking place was I asked Tim for a spruce top as my base to start working on. And he ordered green paint, the military green, and sprayed this wood top. That was the beginning canvas for me to start working on. I mean, I did a pencil drawing and a pencil layout and everything, so I knew how everything was going to look. But I then, using that spruce top, carefully drilled holes where rivets would go. And I created this dimensional piece of art, if you will, buying screw heads that would work, realizing that the screw heads on aircraft are all horizontal. So the wind flow goes right through them, right? So the slots of the screw heads will let the air drift right through. So none of them are going vertical. So keeping that in mind, keeping in mind rivets and thicknesses and depth, I drilled very carefully into the spruce and inserted either like facsimiles of rivets, which were small nails that I bought at a local hardware store. I special ordered screws that were flathead screws. And I created this piece of artwork on top of this wood spruce that was dimensional. So I painted the shark eyes and the shark teeth and mouth on top of rivets and things like that were done. And we were also going to include little guitars.
True multimedia. I mean, you were actually, it was partial sculpture.
Yes. Well, we wanted it to look like an airplane piece of art, but realizing that it was on a guitar. And I wanted the wood tone and the grain to come through as well. So it looked like it was actually built on top of an airplane.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what it looks like.
But it's a wood sculpture. It's wood of the guitar that's showing through. So I carefully gouged and I sanded and I created lines where the fuselage would be put together. And, it was quite a process. And I also designed little guitars. Sometimes you see them in a movie or old photographs where you have this dashing pilot next to his plane. And there are little planes stamped on the side of the airplane, like planes he shot down. So I was thinking about adding models of guitars, not Martin guitars, but in the corners, so that we could like stamp them, and they were like the kill shots. But I think from a legal standpoint, they decided not to do that, and I think it was a good idea that they did.
Yes, and also sort of the pacifists among the Moravians and I could see them taking exception to that. But also, that's the other thing, the exhaust ports. That clearly you didn't actually put exhaust ports on that thing. Those things look three-dimensional. It's just really, really stunning.
Again, a collaborative effort. I did hand paint the exhaust ports, but they handed off that artwork to somebody in the Photoshop department, a graphic artist who sort of made it look more true metal, true to life, rather than the brushed on hand painted look that I was accomplishing.
I'm always amazed at people who can create three-dimensionality on a flat surface. And like I said, when you see that guitar from across the room, it looks like you could go over and grab those exhaust pipes and pick up the guitar and carry it by them. It's really, really stunning piece of work. Before we go any farther, there is one other guitar I definitely want to mention today. Maury and I have very good friends, Paula and Brian Murphy. And you took an order, a commission of Brian to make a very special guitar top for him. And again, another wonderful piece of work from Robert F Goetzl. And could you talk about that a little bit and how that came to be?
Sure, Spoon. I'd be happy to. My pleasure. I guess for one of the events that Martin was doing, maybe back in 2018 or so. They used to host these events maybe during Martin on Main week or maybe Music Fest. I can't remember precisely, but they'd open up the factory and the unofficial Martin Guitar Forum would show up and Martin club owners and everything. And I was doing a presentation in the museum, a small talk using my artwork and showing off some of the work that I had done for the company and the projects and all. And this very lovely fellow, Brian Murphy, came up and asked me if I could create this artwork on a guitar for him, an illustration. And so I made sure that it was okay with the company before I said yes. And they said, that's fine, go to town. And so Brian and I talked, and he told me what he would like and the sentiment that he wanted on the top of the guitar. And to me, it was just so lovely that this couple of Adirondack chairs would be illustrated on the top of this guitar. It was a very special place for him and Paula, up, I guess, in the Adirondacks, on these chairs with a beautiful upstate New York setting and a lake and a large tree. And in that tree, he wanted the name of Brian and his wife, Paula, to look like it was carved in. Kind of a sweet idea, you know, something teenagers would do when they're in love. And that just struck me as something really beautiful, a very lovely sentiment. And I thought, what a lovely way to profess his love for his wife, and that they wanted to share that special moment as a couple. And so I put together an illustration that was done in pencil before I proceeded to do anything like in painting. And I think Brian originally wanted to order a different model guitar, but I'm kind of limited to the size of guitar that I can do or I can work on with a Mamaki printer. That's the high-tech inkjet printer that they use. And so I think Brian had to talk to a Martin authorized dealer and order a guitar. I believe it was a 00 size, not a dreadnought size. And he had to order this special guitar. And that took some time. So then when Brian had to sort of reconfigure his idea about what he wanted to play in the model, I did this illustration and submitted a color study, and they just liked it. They liked it so much. Then we printed it up for him, and they built a guitar, only one guitar like that. And he was really thrilled. And it was so nice to see him this year at Martin on Main, Brian and Paula, still so happy. You know, they're just a wonderful couple. And it was just great hooking up with them. Strangely enough, at the Boak Bash, you know, Dick Boak was a longtime employee, and he had a retirement concert a number of years back. And just recently he had Boak Bash 2, went over that big. And Brian introduced himself again. He said, "Hey, Robert," and we happened to be sitting right directly in front of him. And it was just lovely to reconnect with him and his wife. I have to say, I enjoy seeing again how much he loves that guitar. And what a joy it is for me to be able to share my talent in this regard. You know, the joy that somebody's getting something from this artwork, you know, the love that they have for the Martin guitar, but also the love that they have for this artwork. It's just a beautiful thing. And I'm kind of overwhelmed because I never thought really that my work would have that much impact. You know, you hope so. But often you don't see that result. You don't hear that feedback, and you don't see the joy on both of their faces, the big smile that they just have when they're holding this guitar. So, you know, as a starving artist, getting that kind of feedback is just an amazing thing.
Yeah, lovely story. Yeah, I've always wanted to hear your side of that, because it was, I thought it was a very nice thing for you and for Martin to go ahead with for them.
Well, you know, it's a long process. I put together some sketches for Brian and then a watercolor study to see, you know, what his thoughts are. And again, it's just a slow process. I just don't create a piece of art and say, "Here you go, pal. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you like it." But I work with a client, and I try my best to please him, no matter how many sketches it takes. But essentially to capture that vision that he has, in particular Brian, but any client, capturing the vision that somebody has, which is not easy, you know. I mean, somebody has an idea for a guitar or whatever, a piece of artwork, some kind of commission, and you just can't take a saw, right, and open up their skull and look in their brain and go, "Oh yeah, I see what you mean." You know, it just doesn't work like that. You got to kind of create a piece of artwork based on what you're hearing and through their description and how passionate actually that they are when they're describing this. So it would be a lot easier to look in their brain, but so it's a process, and it's an enjoyable process. And sometimes it's frustrating on my end because, I want to achieve what they're looking for, the client, whatever that is. And despite the fact, just saying that I'm talented enough, that's not really it. There's always some doubts that creep in. And I'm always second guessing myself, whether I'm doing the right kind of artwork or the artwork that they're looking for. And in my mind, I'm not sure that it's probably true for every musician or every artist or every writer or anybody in a creative field. When they put something together, a creative piece of work out there, and they're probably asking themselves, am I doing my best with it? Can I do better? And so that's part of the struggle when I am creating a piece of artwork. I have to say that there's not a project that I'm working on that hasn't been or hasn't given me fits. Nothing's easy. I say to people, even though they're looking at this beautiful artwork and they go, oh, this is so fantastic, what they're not seeing is the struggle there as well. The struggle that I'm having, trying to achieve the right color or the right composition or whatever. Nothing comes out as I envision it. Talk about my brain. I wish I could look in my brain and see how it's supposed to turn out. And it's just a frustrating thing sometimes to work through it. And, you keep at it. You try to achieve the result. And it's getting kind of close, getting close enough. Maybe it's not exactly what I thought. But if you step back as an artist and you look at it and say, that's not too bad. That really works. It's almost there. That can be somehow part of the process, the struggle. And it doesn't always look like it originally was supposed to look in my brain, but it's close enough. And you kind of put it down, you do it, and you move on to the next project. And I'm sure it's like writing music or writing songs. And you guys can tell me all about that. I have no idea how you start writing music or how it turns out in the end or what your vision for that song or that piece would be.
Well, the way I like to write a song is to look over Spoon's shoulder and cheat, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't try to add more frustration to your life. All those people listening to this program, whether it's on YouTube or their podcast platform, can you tell them where they can find you? Maybe somebody listening to this show would like to commission something with you. How would they go about doing that?
And that is a great question, Maury. So what I think the first thing they ought to do is not contact me directly. That should be done either through the Martin Company or Martin distributor or dealer, and they should go through that channel first. First and foremost, I would like to think that I'm exclusively a Martin artist at this point. And so it's going to be a Martin guitar that I'm working on and probably a custom guitar. So that would be the first step. And I wouldn't want to do anything in this budding hand-painted career right now to upset the apple cart. So I think if they wanted a custom Robert Goetzl on a custom Martin guitar, they should start out by contacting a Martin guitar dealer or distributor. But they can, who's ever interested, I can suggest that they would certainly look at my body of work. If they wanted to tune into my Instagram page and see some of the work that I've done for the company or some of the other freelance work that I've had over my career. And so if they look up my name on Instagram, RFGoetzl, I think they'll find my page and they'll be able to get a good insight about the work that I'm doing currently and the work that I've done in the past. And that should kind of whet somebody's appetite if they were really looking for a commission, because there's an extensive collection of my artwork on that Instagram page.
Good answer. Good answer.
Nice. And we'll put that information in the show notes as well. If you're watching on YouTube, check the description below for Robert's Instagram link. And of course, feel free to ask us at Maury's Music for more information as well at support@maurysmusic.com if we can help connect you with Robert F. Goetzl.
Do you have any problems telling us what the F stands for?
Yeah, no, not at all. You don't want to take a guess?
Well, I could guess. Hold on. All right, well, I think the easy guess is Frederick.
So my father's name, I was named after my father, Robert, and my mother's name was my middle name. So my mother's name was Frances.
Oh, so Robert Francis Goetzl. Sounds like a 19th century novelist. Or maybe a naturalist. That's more fitting. So,
And, well, as an only child, growing up, both parents are gone now. At first, as a youngster, I was never too cool about having my name the same as my dad's, because it would got very confusing because he would be Big Bob and I might be Little Bob on one given day, or Robert or Bobby. People called my father Bob. They called me Robert. Some people in my family called me Bobby. So it was very confusing. But, now that I don't have my folks around anymore, I feel like, it's a real honor to have both of their names part of me, and that they stay with me my whole life, the rest of my life. So I think it's all a good thing.
Nice.
another good answer. So yes, like you said, your new budding position or career as doing the custom hand painted tops on these very cool guitars that you're doing in collaboration with Tim Teal, head of instrument design at Martin, and the CEO himself, Chris, your cousin. So in a way, you've come a long way since 2008 when this all started. So maybe it's time to reveal the answer to the trivia question of what was the first model that a Robert F. Goetzl artwork appeared on the top of a Martin guitar.
And that would be the 175th anniversary. The guitar that Martin produced, that was the first one. I created the artwork, and they also had me paint the same design on a real wood guitar, an HD 28. So I had a dual project. I actually had three projects. And at the time, we worked on a Dreadnought style artwork for both. The one that I was working on was an HPL top. I also worked on a Little Martin. I think they were called the LX. And so I had to change the proportion of the illustration and paint another piece of artwork to fit the dimensions, but they all had to look similar. The only thing that changed really was some of the size and the composition of some of the subject matter. And then they asked me to do a hand-painted model, which I did with the same design as the DX and the HPL, which was the HPL top.
So I guess I never knew that. I guess I knew that you did the one-off, the HD 28 hand-painted one. I always wondered how they got that onto the DX, but they were really three separate things entirely. So it wasn't like they just, digitally shrunk down the one for the DX and so forth. So,
yeah, that's right. So the DX artworks were done with watercolor on watercolored paper to the correct dimensions, and I created two separate pieces of artwork, one for the Dreadnought size and one for the Little Martin, the DX size and the LX size. And then I was asked to do a hand-painted guitar as well. And, they had to have all this done for the NAMM show, which was coming up. So my first project with Martin guitar was like this really high pressure thing, This invitation came out of the blue. We would like you to do a guitar for us. And suddenly I'm doing three, and I've never painted on a guitar before. And so I had to do these three guitars in a couple of weeks so they could get them all done and built, constructed, and sent to the NAMM show, which was coming up along with their anniversary. So it was pretty high pressure for the first project. And I think it turned out pretty good. I mean, they were really pleased. And for just another plug, if you don't mind, the museum at the factory, the Martin Museum, the Martin Guitar Museum, has a gorgeous collection of guitars. And that hand-painted 175th guitar is in one of the display cases. So if your listeners should make the trip, if they want to come out to Nazareth and visit the factory and the museum in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, they would spend a lovely day taking a tour, and then they could tour the museum and see some of my work as well, along with this fabulous collection of Martin guitars. If guitars are your thing, get to Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and just look at this one-of-a-kind, priceless guitar collection that Martin has housed in their factory. It's really a world-renowned museum.
And for those who've never been there, which will certainly be some people listening to this, you might even be lucky enough to run into Robert at the museum or in the visitor center right outside the museum. And if you don't, you will certainly see his artwork on the fabulous mural that is the real centerpiece of their very nice visitor center. And so that's a chicken and egg story. Did the guitars come before the mural, or were they connected together? How did that come about?
So after I had finished the 175th anniversary guitar, I think there were few and far between projects, but I really wanted to keep myself up at the factory. So because of this 175th anniversary project and knowing a bit of the history of the Martin family, which really intrigued me, I put together an idea for a mural within the visitor center. And I put together all these little drawings that kind of told the story of the Martin history. And I laid it all out and presented it not just to Chris Martin at the time, but to Keith Lombardi, who was president also. And they loved this idea of having a mural there. And so they asked me to put it together, to take those few sketches and come up with a large model, which turned out to be about 6 foot by 12 foot after this guitar project. And it was a project I put together myself because, like I said, I just wanted to keep working up there in the company. So I was just trying to find a way to do that.
Oh, fascinating. So you pitched it to them. It's really a lovely thing for anybody who's like me, who has spent decades with their own fascination with the Martin family history. And I think it's, I was tickled pink when I first saw it. But I thought you did a marvelous job. And that was long before you and I had ever actually met. And so let me tell you, if I have never told you how much I like the mural, I thought it was, I didn't realize it was your idea. So now I'm even more impressed. But so thank you for doing that.
Oh, thank you. It took over 6 years. And I know everybody kept teasing me that, Leonardo da Vinci painted the Sistine Chapel in less time. And it was a bigger project. But I was really, I was intimidated a bit by this project that I gave myself because I realized very quickly that people, unlike myself, knew a lot more about the company history and about the Martin guitar and all of the little specifics that went into that than I did at the time. So I wanted to make sure that I was doing everything as accurately as possible. And as I was working on it, my head, here we go again, right? My head kept playing games with me. And, like if somebody sees it and it's not quite right, I better go back and make sure everything is just exactly as it should be. And, it was just a time-consuming project. And trying to get this mural done, I was working on 6 panels. Each one actually told a story, but that assembled into one big panel. So if you can picture this, each panel actually could have been hung separately to tell its own segment or story of the Martin history on its own, but then it could be reassembled to the mural that you see now. And when it's assembled, obviously, like a puzzle piece, you get this whole mural that's involved. And it's a very dimensional piece of artwork. And I was creating some of the things that were in the archive room, like ledger books or shop foreman notation books. And so I was creating these, not just paintings, but 3-dimensional artifacts as well. And I had a very small art studio at the time in my basement. And I was trying to work on these panels. And, my wife was coming down with laundry baskets and stepping over the mural, and the cats were jumping on it. And it was like very difficult to get this whole thing done in that space. So I eventually found a different space to work in, a larger space to finish it, that I could lay the whole big mural out and work on it. It was, like I said, it was just time consuming, but I really appreciate the compliments that people are willing to share with me, and how pleased they are that I've done it. And I'm not saying this to brag, but people have told me they just stand there with their mouths open, looking at all of the little pieces that are involved in each one of these panels to tell the story. And so, it's kind of like a Frankenstein monster, right? This assemblage of all these parts, and you just, you hope it's going to work, you hope it's going to walk.
I'm now picturing Chris coming by in Pope's robe saying, "When will it be finished?" And you being Charlton Heston saying, "When it's finished."
I'm now picturing young Frankenstein.
Well, right. Yeah. So it's alive. It's alive.
Well, speaking of time consuming, I feel terrible, but I think we're out of time. I got bad news and bad news. The bad news is we're almost done. And the other bad news, I think we have to ask you back on this program sometime in the future to talk about the museum.
Well, Maury, you don't have to talk me into that. I'd be very happy to be back on your show to talk about the museum. It's certainly a passion of mine. It's another way, truthfully, that I can help tell the Martin story. And not just visually with a mural, but part of my job is to create the museum displays that people, visitors, can see when they come to the museum. So that, in a sense, is a continuation of the Martin mural and telling the story of the Martin guitar and the Martin family.
And speaking of cats, she who must be obeyed is telling me it's time for me to go feed her. So,
well, I have one more serious question before we go, and I want to thank all of our listeners for hanging out as long as they did. Much of our conversation was centered around that beautiful guitar, the Double OL Earth. So you have your co-host Maury Rutch, your co-host Spoon Phillips, and we'd like to ask you, I'll speak for both of us, you've done a beautiful guitar based on my home planet. Do you plan on doing one for Spoon's home planet?
Regular Bob Hope, this guy.
From all of us at Maury's Music, including Robert Goetzl, thanks for listening.
Bye for now, and we'll see you again soon.
Hear you later.
This has been a presentation of Maury's Music, your trusted source for Martin and Blue Ridge guitars. Find us online at maurysmusic.com.